Chapter 47, Literature on the Ground. Hearing these words, Fan Roro remembered that her conversation with her brother had all fallen into her younger brother's ears, and wondered if the little guy would cause any trouble for her brother if she told Lu afterward. Fan Roro's face's cold color all turned to faint worry as she glanced at Fan Xian. Fan Xi's gaze had changed from shock to some admiration. "What's wrong?" Fan Xian looked at him with a wry smile. Fan Xi finally couldn't endure this gaze that seemed infinitely tender but was actually infinitely icy, and shivered. "I'm just surprised that you wrote this book." Fan Xian was a bit nebulous. "You've read this book?" In his impression, in his previous life, if a person would read Dream of the Red Chamber when he was 12 years old and loved to read Dream of the Red Chamber, he would generally become a literati or a rogue who deceived female literati when he grew up. "No." Fan Xi hurriedly shook his head. "I've read some, it's boring." After saying this, he seemed to feel that he had slightly earned back a bit of face, and his head was lifted a bit higher. "It's just that Mr. has read it and said," he thought about it and still told the truth. Mr. was very complimentary, saying that this author's poetic writing has a strange chi, and that there is a block in his chest and abdomen. These were two very high comments. Fan Xian did not blush and said with a smile, "So you admire me?" "I admire you, sir." Fan Xi thought for a moment, "And sir enjoys reading the books you write." Suddenly his eyes emitted a greedy gaze of envy, "And even though I don't read it, I know that in the market nowadays, this manuscript is sold in volumes, and each volume can be sold for 8 taels of silver." He nodded, and then looked at Fan Xian with a gaze that was somewhat like gazing at an idol. "To make so much money by casually writing a few words, it's really awesome. I seem to understand somewhat why Sister worships you so much." "I didn't earn this money," Fan Xian casually corrected, but in his heart, he felt strange. The other party's sense of himself had improved, actually not because he was full of poetry, but because what he wrote could earn money. When he thought about it, he realized that his own father, Si Nan Bo, was His Majesty the Emperor's financial personal steward, due to genetic inheritance. No wonder this little guy seems to be born with a fervent love for silver money. Fan Xi rubbed his hands together and said fervently, "But you're the only one who can write it, and in the future, if you're willing to earn this money, I can take a stake in it." Fan Xian sighed, realizing that the younger brother in front of him was actually quite naive. It was just a pity that there was a conflict of interest between himself and him, and although he didn't actually see what he thought of the Fan family's family business, Nai Lu's thoughts were already deeply rooted. Suddenly, he decided to try something. After all, he was a brother by blood. Some miserable endings could be best avoided. "You still haven't said why exactly you're following me. Don't you have to go to school today?" Fan Xian's mind was already made up, so he was interested in having some small talk with this half-brother. Although Fan Xi was small in age, he was not a straw bag, knowing that he had just revealed some meaning to make the other party happier, so he piled up a lovely smile and answered in a trembling voice, "Because Mom said that my older brother was capable of doing something, so I was allowed to accompany my older brother to play around. It's always good to be influenced by something." Fan Xian sighed in his heart, thinking that the trick of pretending to be cute, no one under the sky is estimated to use it better than himself, and actually played it in front of himself, which can be said to be the Fan men pretending to be shy, and the calm men discussing the words. He understood in his heart that Fan Xi followed himself. It must be Lu's idea. But the other party should have no need to show kindness to himself. Even if he sensed that his father did not view himself as merely a utilization, there was no reason to be so reckless. When the food came up, Fan Xian moved his chopsticks like the wind, sweeping between the plates, the tips of his chopsticks pinching some of each plate into his mouth with uncanny accuracy, not caring about the jaw-dropping expressions of his younger sister and brother beside him. After licking his lips and savoring the food for a while, Fan Xian nodded. "The food in Kyoto is really good." Fan Ruo was very graceful, casually ate some and then stopped eating, half sideways reading The Dream of the Red Chamber. Only Fan Xian and Fan Xi on the table in the feast. Fan Xi ate more and more depressed, thinking that "I have grown more fat than you, how to eat but not as much as you, not as fast as you." Fan Rural more look at the frown more powerful, found that the bookseller out of the dream of red mansions and their own room in the copy is not too different, but the title page before the intentional more girls that paragraph excerpted out. I'm afraid to let the people in Kyoto have read the book, all thought that the dream of red mansions is a book of obscenity. When Fan Xian saw her expression, he knew what she was angry about, and with a slight smile, he rested his chopsticks on the edge of the fish plate and said, "It's just a marketing tactic, what's there to be angry about?" At this point, the siblings' voices gradually grew louder as they spoke. Fan Ruo vaguely guessed what marketing tactics meant, while Fan Sizhou was listening in confusion. For example, in a book, before people buy it, they will definitely flip through what is being said, so this preface, trek, wedge, and such things must be clear and concise, not necessarily required to say what the whole book is about, but it must be of interest to others. Fan Xian took a sip of tea and continued, "Sister, you're angry because this unscrupulous bookseller has placed a paragraph about the many girls at the top of the page, which obviously doesn't illustrate the overall style of the story, but instead tends to give the general public a misconception that this story is a flirtatious tale, right?" Fan Ruo opened her eyes and nodded her head, thinking to herself that she shouldn't be angry that such a mouth-watering text was being sold as that kind of filth. But the bookseller is bound to do that. Fan Xian looked at his sister's serious expression and couldn't help but smile. "If it's up to me, I'm going to go even more overboard than they did. This volume is 10 times, so they should write 10 repetitions and print them on the title page, and write a few lines of the most tantalizing words under each repetition, so that the readers can't scratch the itch in their hearts, so they have to buy the book and go home to peruse it." "Like what?" "For example, like the many girls." "Then how to write this time?" Fan Ruo already understood her brother's meaning, smiling and pointing to a place in the book. It was the 23rd time. "The wonderful words of the Western Wing are through the theater. The Peony Pavilion's colorful song warms the heart of the girl." This time it was about the burial of the flower before the event, and it was not possible to find any words that would make one's heart blush with heat. Fan Xian smiled and said, "Since there are 2 words, of course, it is good to write. If it were me, I would use that part of the garden. Most of those people are girls, are in the world of chaos, the time of innocence, sitting and lying down without avoiding, laughing and joking, where know that Baoyu at this time of the heart of the matter. That Baoyu's heart is not comfortable, then lazy in the garden, only in the outside ghosts, but also obsessed. Is to see the falling red into a formation. And then sit and lie down without avoiding, laughing and smiling without heart, fooling around, obsessed, falling red." These words all traced red. Fan Ruo lowered her head to think about it and realized that it was really like that. This was some random words, but this combination, coupled with the word Yinxiu on the reminder, it could not help but give life some space to think about it in a flawed way. Her face slightly red, whispered, "So brother often do this kind of immodest things." Fan Sizhou, however, was dumbfounded by the sight and said with a thumbs up, "Big brother, you're just too talented." Fan Xian let out a puff and spewed out all the tea in his mouth. It was at this moment that an extremely condescending voice came from the outer room. "Where is this delusional person, full of lust, who dares to call himself talented?"